I also felt like if I'm going to do this movie that's about my parents' relationship, and I really am going to include some of that stuff that I would wonder if my dad would be okay with me putting in, then I really owe it to the audience to be. I can't be this guy going like, and then my mom struggled with this, and my dad couldn't. Was too obsessed with that. If I wasn't, in some way acknowledging my own issues too.
I love the credits at the end where you include your whole family. That's just like such a sweet, generous moment. And it really does feel like such a collaboration between the whole Stiller clan.
Yeah, that was just an idea that I had like right at the end when we were like putting the credits on, and just it kind of made sense to me because it was like, it's that thing like there's like, I think like in the DGA, you have your directed by credit, and then there's like a contractual a film by credit that like a director always has on a movie. And I was thinking, oh, that's going to be like weird to have like directed by and then a film by Ben Stiller. Yeah. And as I was looking at it, I was thinking, oh, well, it's really like a film by, everybody in the family, and especially, when I think back to what my dad was doing and taking all those pictures and kind of the one behind all that. So that's why I felt like it made sense.
Well, it really did feel like a collaboration to me between you and your father, especially because he was such a documentarian, such an archivist in a way, or, keeping an archive of your family and of him and your mother together. So it felt like, did you feel at all when you were making this film that you were sort of like fulfilling this like project of his that he had started in some way, or that you were like doing what it was meant to be done with this material?
I kind of yes and no. I mean, I didn't think of it consciously when I started working on it, but then as I was, going through the process over, a number of years working on the movie, and just realizing the breadth of all the material that was there, and also knowing my dad, it kind of felt to me like, that he would have wanted something to be done with all the stuff that he had saved. He never talked about it that way, right. but that was sort of like his mindset was always like thinking about, trying to process the events of our lives. His life he was always writing about his past and his childhood, and he was, as you see in the movie, he was always taking, like things that were going on in my parents' lives and turning it into their material, as a lot of artists do. And I feel like it was just sort of like it just felt like a natural sort of progression. And at the end of the process, I was like, yeah, I think he would have, like appreciated that there was something done with it. Though I also would wrestle with, what he would have wanted to have, kept in the movie, and what he would have maybe said I shouldn't have put in the movie too, because, but they're not, my parents aren't here to discuss that with. So I kind of like had the conversation in my head, a lot about that.
I mean, as a young budding filmmaker, we see you as this young kid who's interested in making movies and in an entertainment family. But like, how long had you been consciously thinking about making a film about your parents?
I honestly, it was probably, somewhere in the back of my head after my mom died. But then, I think when my dad was, sick for a couple of years, and before he passed away, it's like, it was in my mind doing something about them. But it was also during, when he died, it was during COVID, and it was impossible to do a memorial or any gathering, which we had done with my mom when she passed away. And so, it was like, well, it just felt like again, like sort of like this made sense. This was the natural sort of progression of like to do, I wanted to do something. Yeah, I guess it was just like like a feeling inside that I wanted to do something for my parents, but then I didn't know what it would be. Or once I started working, I was like, well, wait a minute, what is it going to be? Because you can't just kind of do a story of their careers, or it would be kind of straightforward and not necessarily. I didn't know how many people would see it. and I realized as I was in the process that like the movie had to have some sort of other theme or something else going on in it, which I didn't know what it was going to be, but to hopefully draw people in to watch it, you know.
Well, it does, like the film itself, watching the film, you can feel that organic quality of you sort of figuring out that you're making this film. Like I love the opening scenes with you and your sister where you're like, okay, do I talk now kind of thing? Like what was it about wanting to show that like madness of the film?
It was like literally just the making of the making of the movie. Like it was just sort of like this, like, what are we doing here? Okay, we're trying to, I don't know what we're doing. We're going through mom and dad's stuff, and we're gonna why are you filming? Maybe I'm trying to, because when I started filming, I just knew I was filming just to film, and just to have a record of the apartment. Thinking, okay, this would probably be like some sort of documentary about my parents, but it wasn't like. I just thought that aspect of the being honest with the audience about what was going on, and then also like kind of maybe take the air out of the bubble a little bit of like starting out in this, because it's so kind of like melancholy, and like kind of going into the past is so heavy, when you go into your past and you start to live in the world of these, images, and that I thought it would be good to like have like a little bit of a like, hey, like kind of like step outside of it, and because I did want there to be a little bit of humor in the movie too, and just kind of like being truthful about like this is like trying to find what this thing is. I don't know what this thing is,
When you were going through all the material, I mean, what were some of the like amazing discoveries? I mean, I know we do see like that the letter that your mom wrote that you were reading to your sister, like that's an amazing discovery. But like, what were you sort of like shocked to find or pleased to find?
Well, the love letters were definitely a surprise. And just weird to like really like, I don't know, like that stuff was just there too. It was like just in my mom's drawer. It was just it just
It
had
was
been
never
there.
hidden. It was just
It's
right
just
there.
been there forever. Yeah, and a lot of those like Super 8 movies were all around in bins, and I knew they were there. It wasn't like I didn't know they were there, but really like looking at them, and then like that piece where we're in the kitchen, and the part where we talk about my mom's drinking, and Amy and I are watching that. That piece really stuck out at me. That in the context of being an adult, I probably had looked at that footage before over the years, but then, in the context of where I was in my life now, looking at it, that was like kind of a discovery too. Just like, oh wow, like just seeing what the reality of that moment was for me. My sister saw it differently, but that was interesting. But also the audio recordings that my dad did of their rehearsals. There's so many. There's like hundreds, like literally, like I think a couple hundred hours or something. Yeah. So there's a lot, to listen to, and a lot of it. So when they get into these real conversations or these, these arguments, that stuff, hearing my dad talk to my mom, confronting my mom about stuff that I wasn't ever aware that he had confronted her about. That was something that I never know. I mean, honestly, like even like there's still stuff that when I go into the trove of stuff that I haven't seen, pictures, and just even like little pictures of like the picture of my parents when they were really young, and kind of like there's reaching out to each other, that like, things like that just were there, but I didn't kind of ever know they were there.
How amazing to have like recordings of them just like having conversations or arguments or something. Like that's that anybody would have that about their parents is like such a remarkable thing to discover.
Yeah, I know. It was like it was very dramatic to listen to. I remember when Adam Kernitz, who's our editor, who's just a really great editor, and was going through a lot of this material, like kind of ahead of me. He discovered the interview that my dad did with his father. So my grandfather, where he was just driving around the old neighborhood, my dad's old neighborhood on the Lower East Side with his dad, talking about stuff and asking his dad questions, because his dad was older, and I think he wanted to talk to him before he couldn't talk to him anymore about this stuff. So he had that recording of all, like him talk, like hearing my grandfather talk about wanting to be an actor, and that he had tried. I never knew that. So that was really interesting, because I knew my grandfather was like this sort of like gregarious. He played the saxophone, and he had like 4 wives, I think. Yeah, and he was like Willie Stiller, and he was like really like very like life of the party guy. Like, but he never really talked about anything. He never talked. We didn't really have that kind of a relationship like where Grandpa would talk to us about the old day. He just never talked about anything, and he lived to be about 100. And so he lived through a lot, but all these had no idea that he had actually had aspirations to do that. So yeah.
Speaking of the editing process, like what, this is, you're fitting in 2 lives, 4, a whole, family life into this film. What could you not include that you're sad about? What hit the cutting room floor that you were like, ugh, I hate to kill this darling?
I mean, there was, there were like little sort of like, diversions into the neighborhood and the world that we were in. There was a whole story about my parents meeting, the way that my parents met, which was in the movie for a long time, which was that they met in an agent's office in New York, and they used to tell the story on talk shows and as a funny story that my mom went into this agent's office and the agent ended up like chasing her around the desk. Oh my God. And then my dad went in and like afterwards to meet the agent, then the agent started chasing him around the desk was the joke. It was a funny joke, and like, probably not today, probably wouldn't be like politically correct or anything. But like the big question, like, was that based in reality or not? Like, what was the real thing? Like, what really happened? But that was a joke or a story that I'd heard so many times since I was little. Right. And Amy and I discuss it in the documentary, in the movie, which we cut out. But like talking about like what is that story? What is the nature of that story? Because like the reality of that story is like kind of awful that this like guy was chasing my mother around a desk who was like an agent who she's supposed to meet for a job. Like, was that true or not? And that's something I never really thought to, which I'd kick myself to ask my parents about, like, what was, really, like, how much of that was made up, or because I'm sure it was based in reality on some level.
Well, it's so funny because it's like apocryphal family stories and lore are, it's magnified by orders of magnitude because they're also comedians who use, parts of their life in their routine.
Yeah, that became material for them, and that was always what was happening. Was it was turned into funny, into funny stories that were how they, did. That was like how they made a living, really. Like, was kind of, and I think that was probably for them having to kind of navigate all that. I can't really. I don't know. I can't imagine that really, like what that would be like to have to go and like always go on a talk show or whatever and talk about. You see, they're just talking about their relationship. They're talking about how they met. They're because that was what their whole act was about. But it was also their lives. Yeah. Too, and that's what's really interesting to me. Also, in the movie, was interesting when we were making the movie was the editing process of like looking at those 1970s talk shows where people were talking about all this, they were talking about very real stuff about their, just their marriage, drinking, all of it, like that people don't talk about really on talk shows anymore today. When you go on a talk show, then you're not. You're gonna, it's like you do a pre-interview where they talk to you first and say, then you'll tell this funny story. What other funny story, and keep it light. But that stuff was all so like it was amazing to me, like what real stuff they were talking about, because there wasn't like one interview, like one serious interview that they ever did, like 60 Minutes or something like that about their lives.
Yeah, people aren't going on Seth and like being like, yeah, my husband tells me I drink too much.
No, exactly. Yeah. Right. You say that and the audience will be like, oh, whoa. It's like, wait, real stuff? I don't want to know. But, that's kind of, that's, I think, I say that's why people really enjoy podcasts now, I think, because I think I enjoy going and talking on podcasts a lot because you don't have to worry about performing in that way. You can just talk about whatever real stuff you're talking about. Yeah. But like for my parents, they were kind of having to do this combination of, being asked real questions. But I mean, there was an understanding on a talk show you had to be entertaining, but it was a different expectation.
Yeah.
And they ended up going into like very real areas, that was just what it was.
I mean, I am so impressed by, especially like your mom's openness and sort of this like willingness to share. And I think that there is also like a radical honesty that comes through just even in your filmmaking. And I wonder if that openness and that honesty, that bravery to be totally radically honest about everything is like something that you just grew up with, or something that you kind of learned, kind of going through this material and watching them on these talk shows and stuff.
No, because I've never ever really been like that on a talk show.
No, I mean watching watching the material.
No, what I'm saying is like, I never did that. I never felt comfortable being that open or honest on a talk like about like real stuff. And granted, it's a different scenario in terms of what people are looking for. But for me, making the movie was definitely this was new territory to be putting something out there that had all of this very personal stuff in it about my parents, and then eventually, because in the beginning I didn't want to make the movie about anything about my family or my life, but it became clear a couple of years into making the movie that it needed, if it was like the subjective nature of the movie, it had to be, then you have to kind of honor that it's like I'm this making a movie about my parents. And then it was only when I really was willing to kind of start, going into that stuff, that I think the film then opened up into, being what it is, which is more, I think, about, family and relationships and creativity and parenting and, how all those things, coexist with each other. And I also felt like if I'm going to do this movie that's about my parents' relationship, and I really am going to include some of that stuff that I would wonder if my dad would be okay with me putting in, then I really owe it to to the audience to be. I can't be this guy going like, and then my mom struggled with this and my dad couldn't, was too obsessed with that. If I wasn't, in some way, putting my just acknowledging my own issions too.
Right.
Because it
were
just
this
felt
kind of like removed person behind the camera.
Yeah, that would be insincere or like unfair.
Right.
They're not here to like to like really defend themselves and or talk about it. So like that then it started to make sense to me. It's like, okay, yeah, this is a movie about our family, and it's about how things my parents did affected me, and how then the things that I thought I could do differently were affected my kids and my relationship with my wife and all of those things. And that's when it got more interesting, and then started to become about something which was more than just like a chronicle of their careers and their relationship.
And kind of on that note, just as we wrap up, like, you talk about how this film took years to make, and it has changed in iterations, and you're sharing more of yourself and learning about your parents. Like, how do you think this film has changed you beyond just like sharing your family? Like, do you think it has changed you?
I have to say, like, you're just, we're talking about doing these Q&As, but it's I've never done anything like this, honestly. Like, I've been doing it for, whatever. I was like adding up how many years I've been working in show business, like 40 years or something. But I've never had this experience of having this kind of interaction with an audience when people see the movie that is so, it's so personal. So when people talk to me about the movie and give me the feedback as to what they connected with, that is on a personal level for them a lot of the time, talking about, well, this reminded me of my parents or my relationship or something like that. That to me is like nothing I've ever felt before. So it definitely has affected me. And it was scary putting it out there into the world because I knew that it was putting out a lot of personal stuff, but what the experience has been of interacting with audiences about it has been really, really different and really positive for me, and I really am grateful for it.
Well, I'm very grateful that you shared your family with us, because it was truly a treat to sort of like get to spend time with the Stiller family. So thank you for the film, and thank you for being here. Thank you all for being here.
Thanks
And if
for
you could
coming out and
just-
seeing the movie in the theater.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Thank you so much.